In this episode, I'm going to be not only reviewing this classic Hollywood film, but also be unboxing the fantastic Criterion Collection release Blu-ray of Bigger Than Life from 1956. This is a very underrated film in my opinion, and I will explain why. It was directed by Nicholas Ray, and it starred James Mason, Walter Mathau, and Barbara Rush, with a screenplay by Richard Mobom and Cyril Hume. Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies. This is a podcast where I explore storytelling on film from all over the world. And this is a film that I had been meaning to see for the last couple of years. I had only heard of it a couple of years ago as I was rewatching Martin Scorsese's great documentary of about American films that I really enjoyed. I hadn't seen it since the mid 2000s, I believe. And there was a clip from this film, and I thought, what is that? Because I love Nick Ray, Rebel Without a Cause and A Lonely Place is my favorite film noir. I recently just saw Johnny Guitar. I haven't seen all of his films, but I've always loved his films about individuality. But he was a fantastic filmmaker, and something about this really intrigued me. I had the impression it was about middle-class family being destroyed, which to an extent that is what it's about. But the scene that really popped out to me was a dinner table scene where James Mason is screaming at his wife, played by Barbara Rush, and it zooms into this little boy's reaction as he watches his parents be sort of torn apart in that moment. And it was just struck me as being very sad and powerful. I finally had the opportunity to see it, and I first of all want to thank George W. Starts, who actually purchased this for me as an early Christmas present. He's one of my Patreon members, and I want to say, George, thank you again so much. It was very kind of you. And this is, I think, possibly one of the best films I've seen from the 1950s. And I'm surprised it's not talked about more. So I just want to first show this incredible Criterion release again. It has a wonderful, I love these essays inside. Really wonderful essay by B. Kite, who is a writer and video maker living in Brooklyn. And I just love the photographs as well. It has lovely artwork here. As you can see, there's Barbara Rush. It's really, their packages are always so extraordinary. I like that picture there of her, looking out the window. It's really good, and it has that's another powerful shot of James Mason looking in the mirror, catching his son looking at him through the mirror, and it has some wonderful features as well. There's a new video appreciation of Bigger Than Life with author Jonathan Lethem, who talks about half an hour about why this is one of his favorite films, and he actually pointed out a lot of things that I hadn't noticed. And there's an interview with Susan Ray, who is the widow of Nicholas Ray. And there's a half an hour television profile of Nicholas Ray from the late 1970s. Really interesting interview where he talks about his experience with James Dean on Rebel Without a Cause and his whole career in general. But wonderful filmmaker. I think he's really great. And a beautiful Blu-ray print. So if this is a film you like and you don't have the Criterion, highly recommend it because it's really hard to find online in any of the major streaming services. But the film is, it's interesting because on the one hand, it's about addiction. James Mason plays this middle-class man. He's a school teacher. And it begins with his hand looking at the clock and it begins to shake. So right away, it's telling the audience that something is not right with this guy. There's an anxiety. He's in a rush to get somewhere as he's finishing up his class, tutoring this one student, and he actually goes to another job. He's moonlighting, working in a cab company after work, part-time, and he doesn't want to tell his wife about it. And the reason he's working both of these jobs is because he's got this big house in the suburbs, and everything looks great in this movie. The colors, the fashion, the cars, and this is, in my view, it was a critique of the consumerism that people were losing at that time, when this is really just the beginning of the sort of suburbs movement of people wanting to possess things because of it made them look good. And what happens is you lose the individuality, and all that this guy is doing is working, and he's overworked, and he's working 2 jobs to keep up with the quote unquote American dream, so to speak, which after the war was something that they were really pushing for people to buy. And there's a lovely scene early on, this dinner party scene, where you hear the guests talking, and they're talking about things that they're buying. So I just thought, okay, I can see where Nick, because I know Ray's work, and just knowing that he was interested in individuals, I can see where he was going. This is a man suffering from loss of his individuality. He doesn't know who he really is anymore. And they're going to bed after the dinner party, and he starts to talk about how he's dull and everybody else there was dull, and his wife is baffled. So he has a low opinion of himself. And this, you start to see these health problems he has, and he's having pains in his stomach, and he collapses. And you find out he has this rare condition, which was basically fatal. And they start with this experimental drug, which they've had luck with. And basically, he starts to take it, and he gets better, and he goes back to work. He goes home, but he has all of these side effects. Now, this is what's interesting about the film, is that you can think that the film is just about a guy getting sick, and he starts to take this medication, which gives him bad side effects. And ultimately, that's what changes his behavior to become the way it does. But the behavior that you see from him, in my view, was already a symptom of how he felt before. He wanted to be someone who could spend limitless amount of money, and right away he begins to buy a lot of stuff. Once he starts to take this medication, he takes his wife out and insists on buying tons of dresses and all this kind of stuff. And he has this massive ego all of a sudden. There's this other scene where he's arguing with the milkman, because the milkman was bringing in bottles and they were clanging. And he basically says to him that he was doing that to interrupt his intellect, because he accused the milkman of being jealous of him for being smart. So he thinks he's better than everybody. And this is all makeup of his own insecurities, which you saw early in the film. And he's making up for it by basically saying that he's better than everybody else, and he loves money. And there's this wonderful moment where he has his robe on, and he takes some toilet paper and puts it around his neck as if he's some posh, wealthy upper class businessman with a pipe. And his wife gets mad at him because he's been ordering her around a lot, and she closes the mirror, and it shatters. And as he's looking back on himself, I love this moment of the broken mirror, because that's ultimately him. He's broken. And of course, we have these other elements in the film of, he has all these medical bills. Of course, there is no health care. He has to pay for everything, the clothes he's buying, and he's looking at all these bills, and he's going to call the doctor, and because obviously he's having these symptoms, and instead of calling him and telling the doctor what's going on, he tries to solve it himself. He just takes more of these pills, and he becomes addicted to it. And instead of perhaps talking to a psychiatrist, which Walter Mathau, who's like his friend from school, says to his wife, and we see the stigma of mental health, of course, is what, no psychiatrist. If that gets out that a school teacher's talking to a psychiatrist, and really no one wants to deal with the problems. And the problems are, yes, the symptoms are a result of the medication, but he already had those symptoms early on. They are now just growing out of control. And in a way, that's the subtext of the story. The story is that he has to look inward and find happiness, and not look at what he doesn't have. And isn't that so relevant today? Don't we all just complain about what we don't have? Do we not just love what we have? And do we not look at the things that we have and realize how lucky we often are? I'm not saying everybody. I know that there's a lot of deep problems in the world and things that need to improve. But in this guy's case, sure, things do need to improve. There's the question of school teachers, which still holds up today in America, making not very much money. And he has to work 2 jobs. I mean, that's not his fault. That's a problem. He shouldn't have to work 2 jobs, because he's already teaching full-time in a school, which he should be paid for. But you start to see him turn on even that job, and he has this all of these parent-teacher night, and he starts to insult the children and say that they're a bunch of mental midgets and they have to go back, forget about learning, and they have to go back to just hard work and discipline. And you see some of the parents approve, and some of them are just shocked at the way he's behaving. He's larger, bigger than life, bigger than life, so to speak. And I think that's because he hated himself. And again, as much as those symptoms came from the drugs, they are coming from within. And he needed to talk to somebody. And it just gets worse and worse for him. And he starts to take it out on his son. And at one point, he has these ideas that he's going to write these magazines and articles, and he has to leave the house and go into a hotel so he can work. And then he stops because he's like, I have to take care of my son. So he puts all his energy into his son. And there's this scene where they're playing football together. And because the son keeps missing the pass, he insults him. He criticizes him. He says he doesn't know how to be a man, and that if he misses the next pass, he's not going to be able to eat lunch. And then later on, he's making him do homework until 9 o'clock at night, this little boy. And there's this wonderful, which comes from this cover here. This if you notice the shadows on the wall, right before his wife comes in, the shadow of James Mason is one of like a monster, of like an animal, like gorilla-like in nature, as he hovers over his son and demands that he get all these equations right, even though he's hungry and he's tired. So he self-destructs, and it gets worse, and he begins to feel that he is failing, and he begins to think, they go to church, and he starts to think he has to kill himself, kill his son. He's looking at the Old Testament of Abraham sacrificing his son, and he thinks, and then his wife tries to say, no, look, then he doesn't kill his son, and God told him not to. And he says, James Mason says, God was wrong. Which, Jesus, God is wrong. I mean, this is a guy who thought he knew, who's a religious man suddenly saying that he knows more than God himself. So this is where it gets scary. It almost turns into a horror film at this time. And he's already violent within his behavior and his nature, and now he's pushing it to murder and to basically end the family, so to speak. And this leads to a fight with Mathau. I mean, Mathau in the film has been a friend. He's a teacher at school, and he's trying to help, and he's the one saying he has to go see a psychiatrist. And they get into this big fight. And this ending I thought was so clever. You can't help but wonder at that time, during the production code and a lot of pressure to make things happy, he has it seem happy. He might not recognize you when he comes to, and he's psychotic. So we don't know if we can help him, but we know that he has to stay on these drugs. So the wife is thinking, well, what is he going to do? And you see her concern, and she was so good in this. I don't really know much of her work, Barbara Rush, but just her concern for her husband and how to deal with his behavior. And it's quite scary, and of course he does recognize him, and there's this big hug, but that between the three of them. But what does that solve? He has to stay on these drugs. Does that mean that suddenly he is cured of these grand delusions of himself? In my view, he still has to see a psychiatrist, and he has to look within. Nothing is solved in the end. Absolutely nothing. And I thought that was what's so clever, because on the surface, it seems happy. And maybe because the family focuses on the surface of things, they think it's happy. But what happens when they go home? That's the question. What happens when they go home? So it's a wonderful film which works on many levels. There's a lot of different metaphors that Jonathan Lethem goes into, again, on the special features, which were interesting. But I was so much more interested in these people, in the psychology, in the stigmas, in this need to look good at all costs and at the expense of individuality. And if you can't live up to money and buying things and big houses and cars, that you're dull. And unfortunately, this is how so many people see themselves. We measure ourselves based on what we have and what we own, and everything else doesn't matter. And I see that all the time. So it's unfortunate, and I think that this is a really great film that people should see, because it is still so relevant to the many people's lives, particularly in the Western world. So if you haven't seen it, I highly, highly recommend it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed this review. I also want to mention that I have a Patreon membership, which has bonus content that I create for my Patreon members. Just a few bucks a month goes a long way to help content creators out. Go to patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies. I will leave the link in the description box below. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing to my channel. It is absolutely free to do so by pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movies logo. You will see it floating above my head right here to your top left. Just click on that and then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new videos or when I go live. Thank you so much, folks. I will see you in the next episode.